Have you ever wondered why so many young Muslims feel lost, distracted, or disconnected from their faith, even though they know the right path? The answer is not always in themselves. It's often in what surrounds them, silently shaping their hearts and minds, sometimes in ways they don't even notice. Social media is no longer just a tool. It is a lens through which millions of young Muslims view the world. A lens that can either clarify their vision or distort it completely. In today's world, social media is more than a platform. It has become a pervasive force, shaping not only what young Muslims see, but also how they think, feel, and define themselves. The question of whether it is destroying faith and modesty is not abstract. It is visible in the way we live, speak, and interact. Every post, every story, every video is a subtle lesson teaching ideals about beauty, relationships, status, and morality, often without the user consciously realizing it. Social media thrives on attention. It is designed to hold the gaze, to pull the mind into endless comparison, distraction, and craving for validation. For Muslim youth, whose hearts are still forming, the consequences are profound. When your sense of self-worth becomes tied to likes and comments, the value of your soul can be overshadowed by superficial measures. When exposure to immodest images, insensitive humor, or shallow relationships becomes normalized, the perception of what is acceptable begins to shift imperceptibly. What once was instinctively recognized as harmful now seems ordinary, almost harmless. And in that subtle shift, faith begins to erode. Islam teaches the importance of protecting the heart, lowering the gaze, and guarding one's mind. Social media bypasses these spiritual safeguards by saturating our senses with endless imagery and messages. The danger is not just in what is seen, but in what is absorbed. The human mind is shaped more by repetition than by single exposure, and social media is relentless in its repetition of ideas, values, and priorities that may contradict Islamic teachings. A young Muslim scrolling mindlessly may start to question the relevance of modesty, the importance of prayer, or the value of patience and humility. Suddenly, the faith that once defined the rhythm of daily life feels distant, disconnected from the digital world they inhabit. When online relationships take precedence over real life bonds, when virtual approval matters more than divine pleasure, the heart becomes vulnerable. But this is not a story of hopelessness. It is a call to awareness. The very tools that can erode faith can also be harnessed for good. With intention, social media can become a space for learning, dawah, encouragement, and reflection. Following scholars, motivational speakers, and Islamic content creators can create an environment that strengthens the mind and heart, countering the subtle harms of the wider digital culture. The key lies in intentionality and discipline. Islam teaches that the heart is the most important battlefield. It is where faith is nurtured or neglected. Social media itself is not inherently evil, but it is a test of the heart. If one engages without mindfulness, it can become a source of distraction, comparison, and temptation. But if approached with purpose, moderation, and boundaries, it can be a tool for spiritual growth and connection. Young Muslims must learn to control their engagement rather than be controlled by it. This includes setting limits on time spent online, curating content carefully, and prioritizing moments of reflection, prayer, and learning over digital indulgence. By creating these intentional habits, the heart is protected, and faith can flourish even in a world saturated with conflicting messages. It is also crucial to understand that modesty is not just about clothing or appearance. It is about protecting the soul from influences that degrade sincerity, humility, and morality. Social media challenges modesty by constantly presenting ideals that are contrary to these values. When youth are bombarded with images glorifying vanity, promiscuity, and materialism, their understanding of what is honorable or virtuous can be distorted. Islam teaches that true honor is found in the heart, in obedience to Allah, and in sincerity rather than in external approval or popularity. By internalizing these principles, Muslim youth can navigate social media without compromising their values. The ability to differentiate between fleeting trends and eternal truths becomes a mark of maturity and faith. Finally, the struggle with social media is ultimately a struggle of the heart. It is a test of patience, self-awareness, and prioritization. Every choice to scroll mindfully, to disengage from harmful content, or to focus on spiritual nourishment over digital distraction is a victory for faith. The Prophet taught that the heart is the vessel of guidance. If it remains pure, the actions will align with righteousness. Social media then becomes a mirror reflecting the state of the heart rather than the determinant of it. Muslim youth who anchor themselves in prayer, reflection, and knowledge can withstand the subtle erosions of online culture. They can use the same platforms to inspire, educate, and spread positivity, turning a potential danger into a tool for growth. In conclusion, social media is neither inherently good nor entirely destructive. It is a reflection of the intentions and discipline of its users. For Muslim youth, it is a test, a battlefield where modesty, faith, and sincerity are challenged daily. The path forward is not isolation, but awareness, intentionality, and purposeful engagement. By guarding the heart, controlling digital habits, and prioritizing the pleasure of Allah over the fleeting validation of the virtual world, young Muslims can emerge not only unscathed, but spiritually stronger. Social media can either erode faith or reinforce it, depending on the choices made by those who use it. The challenge is great, but so too is the potential for growth, clarity, and unwavering faith. Every time a young believer navigates this digital world with awareness and discipline, they declare quietly yet powerfully that their heart belongs to Allah alone. In today's rapidly evolving digital world, social media has become one of the most influential forces shaping the lives, thoughts, and emotions of young Muslims. Often without their conscious awareness, it is no longer just a tool for communication or entertainment. It has become a lens through which millions of hearts and minds perceive reality, relationships, morality, and self-worth. The question arises, is social media destroying the modesty and faith of Muslim youth, or is it merely revealing the state of the heart? To answer this, it is important to understand the mechanisms through which social media affects the human psyche. Social media platforms are designed to captivate attention relentlessly, utilizing notifications, personalized algorithms, and endless scrolling to keep users engaged for hours at a time. While many may approach these platforms with the intent of connecting with friends or seeking knowledge, the underlying design is to encourage prolonged engagement, often at the cost of reflection, mindfulness, and spiritual focus. For Muslim youth, whose hearts and identities are still forming and whose moral and spiritual frameworks are developing, the implications of such unmoderated exposure can be profound. Constantly seeing images of people who appear more attractive, more successful, or more confident can lead to subconscious comparisons that erode self-esteem and shift the measure of self-worth from intrinsic, God-given dignity to superficial, external validation. This subtle shift is critical because Islam emphasizes the importance of sincerity, humility, and awareness of one's soul over worldly approval. When validation is sought online through likes, comments, or shares, the heart becomes increasingly vulnerable to distraction, envy, and dissatisfaction. Furthermore, social media does not merely present neutral content. It bombards users with ideals, behaviors, and values that may contradict Islamic teachings. For instance, modesty is one of the central principles of a faithful Muslim life, yet social media continuously exposes young hearts to immodest images, flirtatious interactions, and normalized imbalances between appearance and substance. Over time, repeated exposure to these ideas can blur the boundaries of what is acceptable, making the practices of lowering the gaze, dressing modestly, and guarding one's heart seem less relevant or even outdated. The erosion of these spiritual safeguards often begins subtly through passive consumption rather than active choice, making it difficult for young Muslims to realize how deeply their values have been influenced. The danger lies not just in the content itself, but in the way it shapes the internal dialogue of the user. Constant exposure to curated lifestyles, materialistic ideals, and superficial social validation can create cognitive dissonance, where young Muslims' awareness of Islamic values conflicts with the normalized behaviors seen online. This dissonance may lead to frustration, guilt, or even a sense of alienation from one's faith as the heart struggles to reconcile the teachings of Islam with the perceived norms of digital culture. In addition to moral challenges, social media also fosters distraction and fragmented attention, reducing the time and mental energy available for reflection, prayer, and study. Islam places great emphasis on moments of stillness, contemplation, and remembrance of Allah as essential for spiritual growth and maintaining a strong connection with the Creator. When hours are spent scrolling mindlessly through feeds, watching endless videos, or engaging in online debates, these sacred moments are replaced by stimulation that often leaves the heart restless, desensitized, and spiritually fatigued. Moreover, the psychological mechanisms of social media, such as the constant pursuit of novelty and instant gratification, parallel the very impulses that Islam teaches to moderate. The desire for immediate entertainment or attention can overshadow patience, perseverance, and delayed gratification, virtues that are central to developing a disciplined and faithful life. In essence, social media's addictive design and content saturation are not simply external pressures. They become internalized, shaping desires, attention, and the very rhythm of the heart in ways that can erode faith over time if left unchecked. Yet it is important to note that social media is not inherently evil, nor is it solely responsible for the challenges faced by Muslim youth. The same platforms that can erode faith can also be harnessed intentionally for education, motivation, and spiritual growth. For example, following scholars, motivational speakers, and Islamic educators can provide positive reinforcement, spiritual reminders, and practical guidance on living a balanced, faithful life. When approached with mindfulness, social media can become a source of inspiration, a place to reinforce Islamic principles, and a platform for spreading beneficial knowledge. The heart, after all, remains the determining factor. If it is rooted in sincerity, awareness, and a desire to seek Allah's pleasure, the influence of external stimuli can be filtered, moderated, and even transformed into opportunities for reflection and growth. Conversely, if the heart is distracted, restless, or seeking validation from the world, social media amplifies these vulnerabilities, intensifying struggles with modesty, faith, and self-worth. Ultimately, the challenge for Muslim youth is to cultivate awareness of how these digital influences operate, to establish intentional boundaries, and to prioritize spiritual nourishment over fleeting digital approval. By learning to control engagement rather than being controlled by it, young Muslims can protect their hearts and maintain the integrity of their faith, even in a digital culture that constantly tests it. The first step is understanding that the threat is not just in the content seen, but in the accumulation of subtle influences that gradually shape desires, habits, and values. Recognizing this is not a condemnation of social media itself, but an acknowledgement of the responsibility each individual holds in guarding their heart. Through intentionality, moderation, and mindfulness, social media can be navigated safely and even used as a tool to reinforce Islamic principles rather than erode them. By anchoring the heart in prayer, reflection, and adherence to Islamic teachings, young Muslims can navigate the digital world with clarity and strength, ensuring that their faith remains a guiding light rather than a casualty of distraction, comparison, or temptation. The first paragraph, therefore, establishes the foundational understanding that while social media has the power to influence profoundly, its effect depends ultimately on the choices, awareness, and intentionality of the user. Recognizing the subtle ways in which online content shapes the heart is the first step toward reclaiming control, protecting modesty, and strengthening faith in an era where distractions are constant and pervasive. By viewing social media not as an uncontrollable force, but as a potential tool for education and growth, young Muslims can transform a potential threat into an opportunity for resilience, spiritual insight, and unwavering connection with their Creator. This perspective sets the stage for practical strategies, self-reflection, and disciplined engagement that can safeguard the heart and mind, ensuring that faith is neither lost nor compromised in a world saturated with conflicting messages and distractions. The impact of social media on the modesty and faith of Muslim youth extends beyond mere exposure to content. It reaches deeply into the development of identity, self-perception, and moral reasoning. Identity formation is a critical stage in the lives of young Muslims, a period when values, priorities, and worldviews are solidifying, and the heart is especially malleable. Social media, with its curated displays of perfection, constant comparisons, and idealized lifestyles, has the power to subtly shape how young Muslims define success, beauty, and worth. For instance, the endless exposure to influencers who present themselves in ways that conflict with Islamic principles, whether through immodest clothing, flirtatious interactions, or materialistic pursuits, creates an environment where the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior becomes blurred. Over time, these subtle shifts can influence decision-making, leading to compromises in modesty, moral vigilance, and adherence to religious obligations. What is particularly concerning is that these influences often operate unconsciously. A young person may scroll through content passively, believing that they are immune to its effects, while in reality, the brain and heart are continuously processing, internalizing, and normalizing these behaviors. The danger lies not just in explicit images or videos, but in the constant reinforcement of values and norms that contradict Islamic teachings. Modesty, respect, and spiritual awareness require active effort, mindfulness, and intention. Islam emphasizes the importance of controlling the gaze, guarding the heart, and nurturing an awareness of Allah in every action and thought. Social media, by design, encourages distraction, entertainment, and external validation, which can erode these critical spiritual practices. As young Muslims spend more time seeking approval online, the natural human desire for recognition shifts from being grounded in sincerity toward Allah to being dependent on likes, comments, shares, and followers. This shift can create an internal conflict where the heart yearns for divine pleasure, but the ego seeks worldly validation. The resulting tension can manifest as spiritual fatigue, guilt, or even subtle desensitization to behaviors that were once clearly recognized as inappropriate. Beyond identity formation, social media also impacts relationships, communication, and emotional well-being, all of which are closely tied to faith and moral development. Online interactions, which are often superficial and performative, can weaken real-world social skills and empathy. For Muslim youth whose understanding of community, trust, and respectful interaction is still developing, social media can distort expectations of relationships. When interactions are reduced to text messages, emojis, and carefully curated images, the ability to perceive nuance, respect boundaries, and maintain humility in personal connections can diminish. These changes are not merely social, they carry spiritual consequences. Islam teaches that modesty and moral conduct extend to every aspect of life, including speech, interaction, and internal thought. Social media challenges this by normalizing instant gratification, impulsive communication, and self-centered performance, making it difficult for young Muslims to cultivate patience, self-discipline, and mindfulness, qualities essential for strong faith. Furthermore, the algorithms that govern social media feeds amplify content that is sensational, attention-grabbing, or emotionally charged. This creates an environment where messages that provoke envy, desire, anger, or comparison dominate the user's attention, further destabilizing the heart. For instance, a young Muslim who is exposed to wealth, beauty, or popularity that seems effortlessly attained may begin to question their own worth, achievements, adherence to Islamic principles. This can lead to frustration, discontent, even the dangerous rationalization that compromising religious values is necessary to achieve social acceptance or personal fulfillment. The struggle becomes internalized, constant tug of war between faith and the desire to belong, to be admired, or to feel validated in a culture that often measures worth through external markers rather than spiritual depth. Another critical aspect to consider is the effect of social media on mental health, which is deeply intertwined with faith. Anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem are increasingly prevalent among youth globally, and the role of social media in exacerbating these conditions cannot be ignored. For young Muslims, the pressure to conform to secular ideals while striving to maintain Islamic identity can create a persistent sense of inadequacy or guilt. When these emotional struggles are not addressed, they can lead to a weakened connection with Allah as the heart becomes preoccupied with worldly concerns, self-doubt, and internal conflict. Islam encourages turning to prayer, reflection, and remembrance of Allah in times of difficulty, yet constant engagement with social media can replace these spiritual practices with distraction, comparison, and temporary relief from discomfort. This substitution not only fails to address the underlying emotional or spiritual struggle, but can intensify feelings of emptiness, dissatisfaction, and distance from faith. Moreover, social media fosters the illusion of perfection. Carefully edited images, curated content, and selective sharing create a world that is unrealistically flawless. For Muslim youth, this illusion can lead to unrealistic expectations, whether about personal appearance, social status, or religious practice. A young person may compare their own imperfect journey of faith with the seemingly flawless spiritual or social life of someone online, leading to discouragement, self-criticism, and even resentment. Islam emphasizes that faith is a personal journey unique to each individual, and that God judges the sincerity of the heart rather than outward perfection. Social media, however, often magnifies the emphasis on appearances, achievements, and external validation, creating a distorted perception of what it means to live a faithful life. This is why intentionality and awareness are critical. Youth must be educated not only about the dangers of exposure to harmful content, but also about the subtle ways in which constant engagement shapes desires, perceptions, and moral reasoning. By cultivating mindfulness, setting boundaries, and prioritizing spiritual nourishment, young Muslims can create a protective filter against the adverse effects of social media. This includes consciously selecting beneficial content, engaging in meaningful reflection, and seeking guidance from authentic Islamic sources rather than following trends that may conflict with faith. In conclusion, social media's influence on the modesty and faith of Muslim youth is profound because it operates not only at the level of visible content, but also at the psychological, emotional, and spiritual levels. The constant bombardment of images, messages, and interactions has the power to shape identity, self-perception, relationships, and internal moral reasoning. It challenges the heart to maintain awareness, sincerity, and patience, which are essential for preserving faith and modesty. Yet, With intentionality, mindfulness, and guidance, these challenges can be mitigated. Muslim youth can learn to navigate social media not as passive consumers, but as conscious participants, filtering content, regulating engagement, and strengthening spiritual practices to ensure that their hearts remain anchored in Islamic principles. Social media, therefore, becomes not a threat that must be avoided entirely, but a tool that, when approached with education, awareness, and intention, can support rather than undermine faith. The second paragraph emphasizes that the responsibility lies within the individual to cultivate awareness, to recognize the subtle mechanisms of influence, and to actively guard their heart and mind against the pervasive pressures of digital culture, thereby ensuring that faith, modesty, and moral integrity are preserved even in the most challenging environments. As we delve further into the impact of social media on Muslim youth, it becomes increasingly clear that the influence extends beyond identity formation and emotional well-being into the very foundation of ethical decision-making and spiritual resilience. The daily choices of young Muslims, what to watch, whom to follow, how to interact, and even how to present oneself online are subtly guided by the algorithms and societal norms embedded within social media platforms. These algorithms are designed not merely to capture attention, but to reinforce engagement, which often translates to prioritizing content that evokes strong emotional reactions, triggers envy, or highlights worldly success and beauty. In essence, the digital environment subtly reshapes priorities, emphasizing superficiality over sincerity, external validation over internal accountability, and fleeting pleasure over lasting spiritual fulfillment. For a young Muslim striving to navigate faith in a contemporary world saturated with competing ideologies and values, this environment can be especially disorienting. Islam teaches that the heart is the center of consciousness, a sacred space where intentions are formed, desires are moderated, and connection to the Creator is nurtured. Social media, however, operates in a way that constantly challenges the heart, presenting a barrage of stimuli that tempt distraction, comparison, and longing for worldly approval. The constant exposure to content that contradicts Islamic ethics, whether through immodest representations, materialistic lifestyles, secular narratives that prioritize fame and superficiality, can subtly normalize behaviors and attitudes that young Muslims might previously have rejected. Over time, these exposures can create a cognitive dissonance where the mind recognizes certain actions or values as incongruent with faith, but the heart slowly adapts, rationalizing compromises and justifying behaviors that would once have been clearly understood as misaligned with Islamic teachings. This is particularly dangerous because it undermines the process of moral development, which in Islam is grounded in self-reflection, mindfulness, and accountability to Allah. Ethical discernment is a skill cultivated through conscious effort, prayer, study, and community guidance. Yet social media provides a parallel system of values where immediate gratification, viral trends, and popular opinion often hold more weight than spiritual truth. The effect on decision-making extends to relationships, self-perception, and even religious observance. For example, witnessing peers or influencers flouting modesty norms or engaging in morally questionable behavior can pressure young Muslims into questioning the relevance of their own adherence to Islamic principles. The subtle messaging of social acceptance being contingent on conformity to secular or culturally dominant behaviors can instill fear, doubt, or resentment, which, if unchecked, can erode confidence in religious identity. Furthermore, social media frequently blurs the line between the public and the private self. Young Muslims, especially adolescents, are in a developmental stage where identity is both fragile and fluid, making the constant performance of curated personas psychologically taxing. The need to present oneself attractively, engagingly, or in alignment with pure expectations can compete with the desire to uphold modesty, sincerity, and authenticity. This conflict is particularly pronounced in contexts where modest behavior, religious observance, or spiritual devotion might be perceived as outdated, unpopular, socially isolating. Islam emphasizes the significance of intention, niyya, in every action, highlighting that outward compliance is insufficient without genuine inward devotion. Social media, with its performative culture, challenges this principle by rewarding external appearances, popularity, and temporary approval rather than nurturing a sincere, internally driven connection to faith. Beyond the individual, social media affects community dynamics and collective identity. In a globalized, digitally connected world, young Muslims are exposed to a wide spectrum of behaviors, interpretations, and lifestyles, many of which are in tension with Islamic teachings. This exposure, while offering opportunities for learning and cultural exchange, also introduces conflicting norms that can create confusion about what is acceptable or virtuous. Peer influence, online discussions, and viral trends often carry more immediate weight than traditional sources of guidance, such as family, religious scholars, or local community leaders, especially when young Muslims are physically distant from strong faith communities. As a result, the youth may experience a fragmented sense of belonging, struggling to reconcile their personal faith with the behaviors and expectations modeled online. This internal struggle can manifest as stress, guilt, or even resentment toward the faith itself, as the external pressures of social media create an environment where following Islamic principles seems inconvenient, outdated, or socially risky. Another critical consideration is the psychological toll of constant comparison, which social media intensifies exponentially. Islam encourages contentment, qana, gratitude, shukr, and trust in divine wisdom, tawakkul. Yet curated online content often promotes a relentless sense of inadequacy, desire, and competition. Young Muslims are frequently exposed to peers or strangers portraying idealized lifestyles, spiritual achievements, or physical appearances, which can cultivate envy, dissatisfaction, and an insidious sense of failure. The internalization of these pressures can erode self-esteem, displace reliance on Allah, and lead to misplaced priorities such as equating social popularity with self-worth or measuring spiritual success by outward appearances rather than sincerity of heart. In addition to cognitive and emotional effects, social media also affects behavior in tangible ways. The normalization of immodest interactions, casual relationships, and pursuit of fleeting pleasures can translate into offline behaviors that conflict with Islamic ethics. Even subtle participation in online gossip, excessive self-promotion, or flirtatious engagement can erode moral vigilance and desensitize the heart to sin. Islam teaches that safeguarding one's actions, words, and thoughts is a spiritual responsibility, yet constant online engagement can dilute the sense of accountability, as the virtual world often lacks immediate consequences and rewards performative over genuine moral conduct. To counter these effects, awareness and intentionality are crucial. Muslim youth must learn to navigate social media with discernment, setting boundaries, seeking authentic knowledge, and maintaining regular spiritual practices such as prayer, remembrance of Allah, and reflection. Cultivating mindfulness in online engagement transforms social media from a potential spiritual hazard into a manageable tool, one that can inform, educate, and connect rather than dictate values and behaviors. The responsibility, therefore, is dual. Individuals must develop self-discipline and awareness, while communities, educators, and families must provide guidance, model virtuous behavior, and cultivate environments that reinforce Islamic ethics in parallel with online exposure. By combining conscious personal effort with supportive communal structures, young Muslims can resist the subtle corrosive effects of social media, nurturing hearts that are anchored in faith, capable of ethical discernment, and resilient against the temptations of a culture increasingly dominated by performative values. In essence, the third paragraph highlights that the challenge of social media is not merely external but internal. It demands both awareness of the environment and cultivation of inner moral strength, emphasizing that faith and modesty require deliberate, sustained, and conscious effort in an era of constant digital exposure. As we continue to examine the influence of social media on Muslim youth, it becomes evident that the challenges are not merely about exposure to immodesty or secular ideals, but also about the subtle shaping of values, emotional patterns, and spiritual priorities over time. Social media, by design, encourages a constant stream of comparison and self-evaluation. For young Muslims, this comparison often extends beyond superficial measures like appearance or popularity and infiltrates deeper aspects of faith, character, and personal devotion. When a young person sees peers or influencers projecting images of seemingly effortless spiritual practice, religious knowledge, or moral perfection, it can create an unrealistic benchmark, fostering a sense of inadequacy or discouragement. Islam teaches that faith is a personal journey marked by highs and lows, challenges and growth over time, yet the curated perfection on social platforms can distort this understanding, making the natural ebbs and flows of spiritual life appear as personal failure. The psychological pressure to keep up spiritually while simultaneously navigating academic, professional, and social responsibilities can generate stress and anxiety, which in turn affect one's ability to maintain consistent worship, reflection, and ethical behavior. This environment also amplifies the struggle with patience, self-control, and gratitude, which are central to Islamic teachings. Constant exposure to content designed to trigger emotional responses, whether envy, desire, or outrage, can erode these qualities. making it more difficult for young Muslims to cultivate the inner peace, trust in Allah, and moral vigilance necessary for navigating life in accordance with Islamic principles. Beyond the individual experience, social media alters communal dynamics and shapes perceptions of what constitutes acceptable Muslim behavior. Islam places significant emphasis on community, shared values, and collective responsibility, yet the digital world presents fragmented, often contradictory interpretations of these principles. Young Muslims may encounter conflicting opinions, practices, and lifestyles that challenge the guidance received from family, local religious leaders, or traditional learning, while diversity of thought can enrich understanding. The immediate visibility and social reinforcement of divergent behaviors can also create confusion, leading some to question established norms or feel pressure to conform to trends that are more socially validated than spiritually grounded. This tension between digital influence and communal guidance can result in a diluted sense of belonging as young Muslims navigate multiple, sometimes competing identities. Another critical aspect to consider is the role of emotional attachment and identity formation. Adolescence and young adulthood are periods of heightened sensitivity to social feedback and belonging. Social media magnifies this sensitivity by creating continuous feedback loops in the form of likes, comments, shares, and follower counts. Young Muslims may begin to equate online approval with self-worth, moral validation, or spiritual success, inadvertently allowing external metrics to dictate internal values. Islam teaches that the heart is accountable to Allah alone, and true success is measured by sincerity of intention and obedience, by worldly validation or public perception. When social media becomes a primary lens through which self-worth and moral alignment are evaluated, it can obscure this fundamental understanding, encouraging a reliance on human judgment over divine guidance. Additionally, the visual and interactive nature of social media intensifies the internalization of these pressures. Images, videos, and stories are often more emotionally impactful than written content, creating lasting impressions that can subtly shape attitudes, desires, and behaviors. For young Muslims, repeated exposure to content that glorifies materialism, casual relationships, or secular lifestyles can normalize these priorities, leading to gradual desensitization toward behaviors or values that contradict Islamic teachings. Over time, this process can erode critical thinking, moral clarity, and the ability to make conscious, faith-based choices as the line between what is spiritually beneficial and culturally normalized becomes blurred. The challenge is further compounded by the illusion of connection and community offered by social media. While platforms can provide support, information, and fellowship, they can also foster isolation, superficial engagement, and emotional dependency on digital validation. Islam emphasizes authentic relationships, mutual accountability, and tangible community support as essential components of personal and spiritual growth. Reliance on online interactions as a primary source of guidance or affirmation, however, can weaken these real-world connections, leaving young Muslims vulnerable to misinformation, misrepresentation, and emotional instability. To navigate this environment successfully, young Muslims must cultivate intentionality in digital engagement, aligning online behavior with inner values and ethical principles. This involves setting clear boundaries, curating content that reinforces positive spiritual and moral habits, and seeking knowledge and mentorship from reliable faith-based sources. Establishing routines of prayer, reflection, study, and communal engagement provides a counterbalance to the often chaotic and morally ambiguous content encountered online. Importantly, resilience is cultivated not by complete withdrawal from social media, but by conscious, disciplined use, where platforms serve as tools rather than masters of attention and identity. The fourth paragraph highlights that the influence of social media is multifaceted, affecting cognition, emotion, spiritual awareness, and social perception simultaneously. The solution lies in both personal responsibility and communal support, emphasizing awareness, intentionality, and consistent spiritual practice. By understanding the mechanisms through which social media impacts values, beliefs, and behaviors, young Muslims can proactively cultivate a life grounded in faith, self-respect, and ethical clarity, ensuring that digital engagement enhances rather than diminishes their spiritual journey.